Arthur Evelyn St. John Waugh was an English writer of novels, biographies and travel books. He was also a prolific journalist and reviewer of books. His most famous works include the early satires Decline and Fall and A Handful of Dust, the novel Brideshead Revisited, and the Second World War trilogy Sword of Honor. Waugh is recognized as one of the great prose stylists of the English language in the 20th century. The son of a publisher, Waugh was educated at Lancing College and then at Hertford College, Oxford, and briefly worked as a schoolmaster before he became a full-time writer. As a young man, he acquired many fashionable and aristocratic friends, and developed a taste for country house society. In the 1930s, he traveled extensively, often as a special newspaper correspondent, in which capacity he reported from Abyssinia at the time of the 1935 Italian invasion. He served in the British Armed Forces throughout the Second World War, first in the Royal Marines and then in the Royal Horse Guards. He was a perceptive writer who used the experiences and the wide range of people he encountered in his works of fiction, generally to humorous effect. Waugh's detachment was such that he fictionalized his own mental breakdown, which occurred in the early 1950s. After the failure of his first marriage, Waugh converted to Catholicism in 1930. His traditionalist stance led him to strongly oppose all attempts to reform the Church, and the changes by the Second Vatican Council greatly disturbed his sensibilities, especially the introduction of the vernacular Mass. The blow to his religious traditionalism, his dislike for the welfare state culture of the post-war world, and the decline of his health, darkened his final years, but he continued to write. To the public, Waugh displayed a mask of indifference, but he was capable of great kindness to those whom he considered to be his friends. After his death in 1966, he acquired a following of new readers through the film and television versions of his works, such as the television serial Brideshead Revisited. Family background. Arthur Evelyn St. John Waugh was born on the 28th of October 1903 to Arthur Waugh and Catherine Charlotte Rayburn, into a family with English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish and Huguenot origins. Distinguished forebears include Lord Cockburn, a leading Scottish advocate and judge, William Morgan, a pioneer of actuarial science who served the Equitable Life Assurance Society for 56 years, and Philip Henry Gosse, a natural scientist who became notorious through his depiction as a religious fanatic in his son Edmund's memoir Father and Son. Among ancestors bearing the Waugh name, the Rev. Alexander Waugh was a minister in the Secession Church of Scotland who helped found the London Missionary Society and was one of the leading nonconformist preachers of his day. His grandson Alexander Waugh was a country medical practitioner who bullied his wife and children and became known in the Waugh family as the Brute. The elder of his two sons, born in 1866, was Arthur Waugh. After attending Sherborne School and New College, Oxford, Arthur Waugh began a career in publishing and as a literary critic. In 1902 he became managing director of Chapman and Hall, publishers of the works of Charles Dickens. He had married Catherine Rayburn in 1893. The first son, Alexander Rayburn Waugh, was born on the 8th of July 1898. Alec Waugh later became a novelist of note. At the time of his birth the family were living in North London, at Hillfield Road, West Hampstead Way. On the 28th of October 1903, the couple's second son was born, in great haste before Dr. Andrews could arrive. Catherine recorded. On the 7th of January 1904 the boy was christened Arthur Evelyn St. John Waugh, but was known in the family and in the wider world as Evelyn. Childhood. Golders Green and Heath Mount. In 1907, the Waugh family left Hillfield Road for Underhill, a house which Arthur had built in North End Road, Hampstead, close to Golders Green, then a semi-rural area of dairy farms, market gardens and bluebell woods. Evelyn received his first school lessons at home from his mother, with whom he formed a particularly close relationship. His father, Arthur Waugh, was a more distant figure, whose close bond with his elder son, Alec, was such that Evelyn often felt excluded. In September 1910, Evelyn began as a day pupil at Heathmount Preparatory School. By then, he was a lively boy of many interests, who already had written and completed The Curse of the Horse Race, his first story. Waugh spent 6 relatively contented years at Heathmount. On his own assertion, he was quite a clever little boy, who was seldom distressed or overawed by his lessons. Physically pugnacious, Evelyn was inclined to bully weaker boys. Among his victims was the future society photographer Cecil Beaton, who never forgot the experience. Outside school, he and other neighborhood children performed plays, usually written by Waugh, on the basis of the xenophobia fostered by the genre books of invasion literature, that the Germans were about to invade Britain. Waugh organized his friends into the pistol troop, who built a fort, went on maneuvers and paraded in makeshift uniforms. In 1914, after the First World War began, Waugh and other boys from the Boy Scout troop of Heathmount School were sometimes employed as messengers at the War Office. Evelyn loitered about the War Office in hope of glimpsing Lord Kitchener, but never did. Family holidays usually were spent with the Waugh aunts at Midsummer Norton, in a house lit with oil lamps, a time that Waugh recalled with delight. Many years later, at Midsummer Norton, Evelyn became deeply interested in High Anglican Church rituals, the initial stirrings of the spiritual dimension that later dominated his perspective of life, and he served as an altar boy at the local Anglican church. During his last year at Heathmount, Waugh established and edited the Cynic School magazine. Lancing like his father before him, Alec Waugh went to school at Sherborne, and it was presumed by the family that Evelyn would follow. But in 1915, the school asked Alec to leave after a homosexual relationship came to light. Alec departed Sherborne for military training as an officer, and, while awaiting confirmation of his commission, wrote The Loom of Youth, a novel of school life, which alluded to homosexual friendships at a school that was recognizably Sherborne. The public sensation caused by Alec's novel so offended the school that it became impossible for Evelyn to go there. In May 1917, much to his annoyance, he was sent to Lancing College, in his opinion a decidedly inferior school. Waugh soon overcame his initial aversion to Lancing, settled in and established his reputation as an aesthete. In November 1917, his essay, In Defense of Cubism, was accepted by and published in the arts magazine Drawing and Design. It was his first published article. Within the school, he became mildly subversive, mocking the school's cadet corps and founding the Corpse Club for those who were weary of life. The end of the war saw the return to the school of younger masters such as J. F. Roxburgh, who encouraged Waugh to write and predicted a great future for him. Another mentor, Francis Crease, taught Waugh the arts of calligraphy and decorative design. Some of the boys' work was good enough to be used by Chapman and Hall on book jackets. In his later years at Lancing, Waugh achieved success as a house captain, editor of the school magazine and president of the debating society, and won numerous art and literature prizes. He also shared most of his religious beliefs. He started a novel of school life, entitled but abandoned the effort after writing about around 5,000 words. He ended his school days by winning a scholarship to read modern history at Hertford College, Oxford, and left Lancing in December 1921. Oxford. Waugh arrived in Oxford in January 1922. He was soon writing to old friends at Lancing about the pleasures of his new life. He informed Tom Dryburgh, "I dunno work here and never go to chapel." During his first 2 terms, he generally followed convention. He smoked a pipe, bought a bicycle, and gave his maiden speech at the Oxford Union, opposing the motion that this house would welcome prohibition. Waugh wrote reports on Union debates for both Oxford magazines, Cherwell and Isis, and he acted as a film critic for Isis. He also became secretary of the Hertford College Debating Society, an onerous but not honorific post. He told Dryburgh, although Waugh tended to regard his scholarship as a reward for past efforts rather than a stepping stone to future academic success, he did sufficient work in his first 2 terms to pass his history previous, an essential preliminary examination. The arrival in Oxford in October 1922 of the sophisticated Etonians Harold Acton and Brian Howard changed Waugh's Oxford life. Acton and Howard rapidly became the center of an avant-garde circle known as the Hypocrites, whose artistic, social and homosexual values Waugh adopted enthusiastically. He later wrote, "It was the stamping ground of half my Oxford life." He began drinking heavily, and embarked on the first of several homosexual relationships, the most lasting of which were with Richard Pears and Alistair Graham. He continued to write reviews and short stories for the university journals, and developed a reputation as a talented graphic artist, but formal study largely ceased. This neglect led to a bitter feud between Waugh and his history tutor, C.R.M. F. Crutwell, Dean of Hertford College. When Crutwell advised him to mend his ways, Waugh responded in a manner he admitted later was fatuously haughty. From then on, relations between the two descended into mutual hatred. Waugh continued the feud long after his Oxford days by using Crutwell's name in his early novels for a succession of ludicrous, ignominious or odious minor characters. Waugh's dissipated lifestyle continued into his final Oxford year, 1924. A letter written that year to a Lancing friend, Dudley Carew, hints at severe emotional pressures. "I have been living very intensely these last 3 weeks. For the last fortnight I have been nearly insane. I may perhaps one day in a later time tell you some of the things that have happened." He did just enough work to pass his final examinations in the summer of 1924 with a third-class degree, having begun at Hertford in the second term of the 1921-22 academic year. Waugh had completed only 8 terms when he sat his finals. Under the university's statutes, 9 terms residence were necessary before the degree could be awarded. Waugh's poor results led to the loss of his scholarship, which made it impossible for him to return to Oxford for that final term, so he left without his degree. Back at home, Waugh began a novel, The Temple at Thatch, and worked with some of his fellow hypocrites on a film, The Scarlet Woman, which was shot partly in the gardens at Underhill. He spent much of the rest of the summer in the company of Alistair Graham. After Graham departed for Kenya, Waugh enrolled for the autumn at a London art school. Heedless early career. Schoolmaster and incipient writer, Waugh began at Evelyn's in late September 1924. but became bored with the routine and quickly abandoned his course. He spent weeks partying in London and Oxford before the overriding need for money led him to apply through an agency for a teaching job. Almost at once, he secured a post at Arnold House, a boys' preparatory school in North Wales. Beginning in January 1925, he took with him the notes for his novel, The Temple at Thatch, intending to work on it in his spare time. Despite the gloomy ambience of the school, Waugh did his best to fulfill the requirements of his position. But a brief return to London and Oxford during the Easter holiday only exacerbated his sense of isolation. In the summer of 1925, Waugh's outlook briefly improved with the prospect of a job in Pisa, Italy, as secretary to the Scottish writer Charles Kenneth Scott Moncrieff, who was engaged on the English translations of Marcel Proust's works. Believing that the job was his, Waugh resigned his position at Arnold House. He had meantime sent the early chapters of his novel to Acton for assessment and criticism. Acton's reply was so coolly dismissive that Waugh immediately burnt his manuscript. Shortly afterwards, before he left North Wales, he learned that the Moncrieff job had fallen through. The twin blows were sufficient for him to consider suicide. He records that he went down to a nearby beach and, leaving a note with his clothes, walked out to sea. An attack by jellyfish changed his mind, and he returned quickly to the shore. During the following 2 years, Waugh taught at schools in Aston Clinton and Notting Hill in London. He considered alternative careers in printing and cabinet making, and attended evening classes in carpentry at Holborn Polytechnic while continuing to write. A short story, The Balance, written in an experimental modernist style, became his first commercially published fiction, when it was included by Chapman and Hall in a 1926 anthology, Georgian Stories. An extended essay on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood was printed privately by Alistair Graham, using by agreement the press of the Shakespeare Head Press in Stratford-upon-Avon, where he was undergoing training as a printer. This led to a contract from the publishers Duckworth's for a full-length biography of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, which Waugh wrote during 1927. He also began working on a comic novel. After several temporary working titles, this became Decline and Fall. Having given up teaching, he had no regular employment except for a short, unsuccessful stint as a reporter on the Daily Express in April to May 1927. That year he met and fell in love with Evelyn Gardner, the daughter of Lord and Lady Beauclerk. He Evelyn and she Evelyn. In December 1927, Waugh and Evelyn Gardner became engaged, despite the opposition of Lady Beauclerk, who felt that Waugh lacked moral fibre and kept unsuitable company. Among the friends, they quickly became known as he Evelyn and she Evelyn. Waugh was at this time dependent on a £4 a week allowance from his father and the small sums he could earn from book reviewing and journalism. The Rossetti biography was published to a generally favourable reception in April 1928. J.C. Squire in The Observer praised the book's elegance and wit. Acton gave cautious approval, and the novelist Rebecca West wrote to express how much she had enjoyed the book. Less pleasing to Waugh was the Times literary supplement's references to him as Miss Waugh. When Decline and Fall was completed, Duckworth objected to its obscenity, but Chapman and Hall agreed to publish it. This was sufficient for Waugh and Gardner to bring forward the wedding plans. They were married in St Paul's Church, Portman Square, on the 27th of June 1928, with only Acton, Alec Waugh and the bride's friend Pansy Pakenham present. The couple made the home in a small flat in Canonbury Square, Islington. The first months of the marriage were overshadowed by a lack of money, and by Gardner's poor health, which persisted into the autumn. In September 1928, Decline and Fall was published to almost unanimous praise. By December, the book was into its third printing, and the American publishing rights were sold for $500. In the afterglow of his success, Waugh was commissioned to write travel articles in return for a free Mediterranean cruise, which he and Gardner began in February 1929. As an extended, delayed honeymoon, the trip was disrupted when Gardner contracted pneumonia and was carried ashore to the British hospital in Port Said. The couple returned home in June, after her recovery. A month later, without warning, Gardner confessed that the mutual friend, John Haygate, had become her lover. After an attempted reconciliation failed, a shocked and dismayed Waugh filed for divorce on the 3rd of September 1929. The couple apparently met again only once, during the process for the annulment of the marriage a few years later. Years of celebrity recognition. Waugh's first biographer, Christopher Sykes, records that after the divorce, friends saw, or believed they saw, a new hardness and bitterness in Waugh's outlook. Nevertheless, despite a letter to Acton in which he wrote that he did not know it was possible to be so miserable in life, he soon resumed his professional and social life. He finished his second novel, Vile Bodies, and wrote articles, including one for the Daily Mail on the meaning of the marriage ceremony. During this period, Waugh began the practice of staying at the various houses of his friends. He was to have no settled home for the next 8 years. Vile Bodies, a satire on the bright young people of the 1920s, was published on the 19th of January 1930 and was Waugh's first major commercial success. Despite its quasi-biblical title, the book is dark, bitter, a manifesto of disillusionment, according to biographer Martin Stannard. As a best-selling author, Waugh could now command larger fees for his journalism. Amid regular work for the Graphic, Town and Country and Harper's Bazaar, he quickly wrote Labels, a detached account of his honeymoon cruise with she Evelyn. Conversion to Catholicism. On the 29th of September 1930, Waugh was received into the Catholic Church. That shocked his family and surprised some of his friends, but he had contemplated the step for some time. He had lost his Anglicanism at Lancing and had led an irreligious life at Oxford, but there are references in his diaries from the mid-1920s to religious discussion and regular church-going. On the 22nd of December 1925, Waugh wrote, "Claude and I took Audrey to supper and sat up until 7 in the morning arguing about the Roman Church." The entry for the 20th of February 1927 includes, "I'm to visit a Father Underhill about being a parson." Throughout the period, Waugh was influenced by his friend Olivia Plunkett Green, who had converted in 1925 and of whom Waugh later wrote, "She bullied me into the church." It was she who led him to Father Martin Darcy, a Jesuit, who persuaded Waugh on firm intellectual convictions but little emotion that the Christian revelation was genuine. In 1949, Waugh explained that his conversion followed his realization that life was unintelligible and unendurable without God. Writer and traveler. On the 10th of October 1930, Waugh, representing several newspapers, departed for Abyssinia to cover the coronation of Haile Selassie. He reported the event as an elaborate propaganda effort to convince the world that Abyssinia was a civilized nation that concealed that the emperor had achieved power through barbarous means. A subsequent journey through the British East Africa colonies and the Belgian Congo formed the basis of 2 books, the travelogue Remote People and the comic novel Black Mischief. Waugh's next extended trip in the winter of 1932–1933 was to British Guiana in South America, possibly possibly taken to distract him from a long and unrequited passion for the socialite Teresa Youngman. On arrival in Georgetown, Waugh arranged a river trip by steam launch into the interior. He traveled on via several staging posts to Boa Vista in Brazil, and then took a convoluted overland journey back to Georgetown. His various adventures and encounters found their way into two further books: his travel account 92 Days and the novel A Handful of Dust, both published in 1934. Back from South America, Waugh faced accusations of obscenity and blasphemy from the Catholic journal The Tablet, which objected to passages in Black Mischief. He defended himself in an open letter to the Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Francis Bourne, which remained unpublished until 1980. In the summer of 1934, he went on an expedition to Spitsbergen in the Arctic, an experience he did not enjoy and of which he made minimal literary use. On his return, determined to write a major Catholic biography, he selected the Jesuit martyr Edmund Campion as his subject. The book, published in 1935, caused controversy by its forthright pro-Catholic, anti-Protestant stance but brought its writer the Hawthornden Prize. He returned to Abyssinia in August 1935 to report the opening stages of the Second Italo-Abyssinian War for the Daily Mail. Waugh, on the basis of his earlier visit, considered Abyssinia a savage place which Mussolini is doing well to tame. According to his fellow reporter, William Deeds, Waugh saw little action and was not wholly serious in his role as a war correspondent. Deeds remarks on the older writer's snobbery: "None of us quite measured up to the company he liked to keep back at home." However, in the face of imminent Italian air attacks, Deeds found Waugh's courage deeply reassuring. Waugh wrote up his Abyssinian experiences in a book, War in Abyssinia, which Rose Macaulay dismissed as a fascist tract on account of its pro-Italian tone. A better-known account is his novel Scoop, in which the protagonist, William Booth, is loosely based on Deeds. Among Waugh's growing circle of friends were Diana Guinness and Brian Guinness, Lady Diana Cooper and her husband Duff Cooper, Nancy Mitford, who was originally a friend of Evelyn Gardner's, and the Lygon sisters. Waugh had known Hugh Patrick Lygon at Oxford. Now he was introduced to the girls and their country house, Maidasfield Court, which became the closest that he had to a home during his years of wandering. In 1933, on a Greek islands cruise, he was introduced by Father Darcy to Gabriel Herbert, eldest daughter of the late explorer Aubrey Herbert. When the cruise ended, Waugh was invited to stay at the Herbert family's villa in Portofino, where he first met Gabriel's 17-year-old sister, Laura. Second marriage. On his conversion, Waugh had accepted that he would be unable to remarry while Evelyn Gardner was alive. However, he wanted a wife and children, and in October 1933, he began proceedings for the annulment of the marriage on the grounds of lack of real consent. The case was heard by an ecclesiastical tribunal in London, but a delay in the submission of the papers to Rome meant that the annulment was not granted until the 4th of July 1936. In the meantime, following their initial encounter in Portofino, Waugh had fallen in love with Laura Herbert. He proposed marriage by letter in spring 1936. There were initial misgivings from the Herberts, an aristocratic Catholic family. As a further complication, Laura Herbert was a cousin of Evelyn Gardner. Despite some family hostility, the marriage took place on the 17th of April 1937 at the Church of the Assumption in Warwick Street, London. As a wedding present, the bride's godmother bought the couple Piers Court, a country house near Stinchcombe in Gloucestershire. The first child, a daughter, Maria Theresa, was born on the 9th of March 1938, and a son, Oberon Alexander, on the 17th of November 1939. Between these events, Scoop was published in May 1938 to wide critical acclaim. In August 1938, Waugh, with Laura, made a 3-month trip to Mexico, after which he read Robbery Under Law, based on his experiences there. In the book he spelled out clearly his conservative credo. He later described the book as dealing little with travel and much with political questions.